Today I'm here with Alan Cobb. He's the National Director of Coalitions for the Trump campaign. Alan, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So, today you were at the Pachyderm Club giving an update on the Trump campaign. I was wondering if you can give us kind of a snapshot of what you said today.
Sure. I talked a little bit about some of the funny and interesting stories on the campaign. I've been on board since last March of 2015, and actually started talking to them in January 2015, and talked about some of the strategies and tactics that we're deploying and where the state of the race is. We're in a really good spot, and it was I was warmly received and had a lot of good questions.
Good, good. So, all the way back in March. Now, is that before he officially announced?
Yes, he announced mid-June 2015, and the thought was he always would, but you don't know until you really announce. And we go through the machinations and planning and strategy. What are the chances for success? They were certainly less than 50 because you had such a strong field, but there were things to do to start the process in case he does announce. So you don't want to wait until July or August. Everything from getting on ballots and even starting the delegate process.
That makes sense. And how did Trump come to find you?
His campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, actually worked for me at Americans for Prosperity. I was the national vice president for state operations, and he was our Northeast state director. And so he was climbed on board the Trump train early and asked me if I wanted to join, and we talked about it for a little bit, and I did.
All right. And so you've worked on some serious campaigns in the past. I know there was Pompeo and Roberts and I think Dole even. What's the difference between these campaigns for people who people might think are establishments and the Trump campaign?
Biggest difference is that it's a national campaign and it's a presidential, and in fact in some ways I also ran Tim Schellenberger's campaign in 2002, and I think the biggest difference, it's as if we're running 12 or 13 gubernatorial campaigns at once. In some ways, Donald Trump is running for governor in Nevada because he wants that Nevada vote, and Colorado, and Iowa, and Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and Ohio, etc. So I think probably just the sheer volume is the difference. Some of the specific campaign things, now there's a lot of similarities. You need to go talk to people, do town hall meetings, do television ads, do rallies, etc. So the elements are similar, just on a much grander scale.
And what do you anticipate a potential role for yourself being in a Trump administration should he win? Oh
boy, I don't know. I honestly do not spend much of any time thinking about it. I probably should, just that I'm going to have a life on November 9th and kids to feed, etc. But honestly, haven't thought much about it. I'm definitely a Kansas guy. My wife and I and family live here in Topeka, and we grew up in Wichita. So not looking to move anywhere in particular, but also it'd be an honor to serve the country if given the right opportunity.
All right. And now this is an interesting question that I've been asked to ask you.
Okay.
How is Trump reaching out to minorities and dispelling this fiction that he's some kind of racist?
He's just going right to them, just like he visited the African-American church in Detroit. I was there at that event. It was stunning, the amount of love and support for Donald Trump. Doesn't mean everybody's going to vote for him, but did they appreciate him coming out and asking for their vote? Absolutely. He delivered about 10 minutes of personally written remarks addressing a new civil rights era for jobs and safety, very warmly received. He visited an African-American church in Cleveland 2 days ago, Wednesday, so we're going to continue to do that. He's visited with many Hispanic leaders in Colorado, Nevada, and Florida. In Arizona. Those are the 4 states where the Hispanic engagement is very, very important. And so it's really nothing complicated, but for some reason Republicans have not always made these efforts in some of those communities, and I think it's been to their detriment.
And you bring up 2 things. First, how is Trump different from the last several Republican nominees?
I think he's clearly willing just to throw out the conventional rules and go to a black church and not worry about offending anybody. And I think he visited with over 1,000 evangelical leaders, both lay leaders and pastors, in New York in January. I don't think Mitt Romney or John McCain did that. It's almost like they were being afraid to court the evangelical vote. And I think he's just more willing, because he's not been part of the old system. And there is a lot of the establishment, I don't know if that's the right word, but even among conservatives, well, there's certain things you don't do. And he looks at it as what is the right thing to do. He doesn't care about what the past conventional wisdom says. I think that's probably the biggest difference between him and others. And I think the fact that he hasn't been a politician, hasn't been part of that system, allows him in some ways to be much more free and a freer way of thinking of things.
And then you talk about the speeches. You know, Trump's been doing a lot of teleprompter speeches, people like to call them. Who writes these?
It's a combination. He certainly his input is highly valued, and we have some professional speechwriters and staff people that have been around him for a while that are policy experts in those particular areas. But ultimately, they put it into his voice. He edits extensively and puts it and makes sure it's in his voice.
How is the Trump campaign reaching out to millennials and young people?
Through social media, college visits. We have an extensive grassroots operation with college campuses among all the battleground states. So again, nothing unusual, pretty basic stuff, but we're out there and asking for the votes, and I think that's millennials is begun to be an enormous weakness for Hillary Rodham Clinton. I don't know exactly why, but I think it's because they're both roughly the same age, but she's been a part of the system. He is not. The millennials are tired of the current system, don't like it, and I think that's why you see folks flocking to Donald Trump.
And do you think maybe it's because Trump he's fun, he's energetic, and maybe Hillary not so much?
I think that's part of it. And again, I think it is that Trump's been not part of the system, and he's an engaging gentleman, one-on-one or in group setting.
So the Bernie voters, there's been some talk of maybe them coming over to the Trump camp. Do you see this happening?
I do. I don't know the extent of it, because I think some of the Bernie voters were an anti-establishment. Protest vote's probably not exactly the right way, but against the status quo. So I think we'll get some of them. But ultimately, the hardcore Bernie supporters are left of center. Donald Trump's clearly not left of center. But I think there is an appeal about blowing up the current system in a productive way that we'll get some of those for sure.
And there's a lot of talk about the media and it having definitely a not so pro-Trump bias. Is this true, and how is Trump going to fight it?
Sure, it's true. Of course, it's just obvious. Read any of the major newspapers, watch any of the major cable or broadcast network news shows. I think we're breaking through by doing what he's done for a year and a half, talking directly to the voters at events, and with direct mail, and with radio and social media. So it's the same things others candidates have to do, go around the mainstream media, debate, fight with them as best we can to make sure they're reporting things accurately. But clearly many sides have begun to take an advocacy role. They're not trying to say, they're not using the he said, she said. They're simply stating their opinion about what Trump said or didn't say, or Clinton. But it's not an unusual problem. We've seen it before.
That's true, and it always seems to be the Republicans at the end of it. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to The Honest Media. I'm here with Alan Cobb, the National Director of Coalitions for the Trump campaign, and I wonder if you can tell us, what does the National Director of Coalitions do?
Well, try to make sure we're reaching voters in the ways in which they want to receive information and in the method and messaging that most appeals to them. And certainly some of it's pretty traditional to have an African American engagement, Hispanic engagement, seniors, veterans, etc. So I think certainly we don't play identity politics like the left of center groups do, and we certainly don't want to pander, but we want to be respectful of how people receive their information, as Donald Trump going to the African American church in the heart of Detroit. Okay. So it's working with all those groups and national groups, and then there's certain things like candidate questionnaires and working with unions and their questionnaires and other basically voter blocks and voter groups.
Okay, and I guess appearing on programs like this one?
That's correct. That's right.
So you spend a lot of time with the Trump campaign staff. What's the energy like? What's the atmosphere like?
High energy. Everybody's working really hard. The day starts, at least in the office, between 7 and, I'm in New York a lot, between 7 and 8, and doesn't end until 10 or 11. I mean, people have a variety of schedules within that, but there's a lot of energy, a lot of tiredness at the end of the day, but a lot of enthusiasm, and we all see what everybody else sees. There's the momentum. I mean, we see it within the campaign, but certainly see it externally. There's a lot of momentum for Donald Trump in the campaign, and it seems to literally get a little better every day. And so I'm sure we'll have some more ebb and flow between now and November 8th, but it sure looks good now. So
the debates, if you're privy to it, what is Trump doing, if anything, to prepare?
Just normal preparation, making sure he understands and it can and answer questions in the variety of way which they're going to be asked. The moderators put out a list of 3 topic areas that they're going to be focused on. and being ready, willing, and able to respond to what Hillary Clinton may say and the ways in which she says them. So pretty nothing too exciting, nothing unusual, but certainly there's preparation going on.
Okay, and since you mentioned that you're in New York frequently, the media likes to talk about the staff changes in the Trump campaign. And personally, I've always thought, well, you hire the best person for the best job at the best time. Is that what's going on, or is there something nefarious, as the media likes to pretend?
I think that staff changes are typical for presidential campaigns. In fact, someone was joking that if you get on a presidential campaign, you want to get on the third wave, because there's always a third wave. And there's also been a lot of consistency with staffs. And I've been on board since last March. I'm not the only one that's been around for a long time. So some of the public high-level folks have moved on, or maybe serving in different roles, but it's really nothing unusual. And I think we have a very well-oiled machine right now. Everybody's on the same page. It's working very well.
How do you think Trump's campaign is different from the traditional campaign?
We're not spending as much time on television, and I think that's people are getting their information different from television. They're not getting as much information from television. And I think that we have a much smaller staff, much leaner staff, and I kind of wonder what in the world some of those other staffs did, because I feel like we're getting most of our things done in a timely manner, maybe everything done. So I think it's just more of a modern campaign, and we're very strategic and tactical, and I think efficient. We don't spend time on things that aren't going to ultimately lead to victory, and so I think sometimes, or that we're certain that will lead to victory. So I think it's almost more attitudinal, and then the specific ways in which we do things, like going to Mexico, going to the black church in Detroit, going to the church in Cleveland. So I think some of the tactical things we're just willing to do differently than previous Republican nominees.
And so a few weeks ago, the lovely Hillary Clinton came out and talked about a group online that she calls the alt-right. Does the Trump campaign think that these people help? Are they really what Clinton said? What's your take on that?
I don't know what she's referring to. I mean, I read Breitbart, and they're a good source of news and a different perspective from different things. So it's just another way of her effort to denigrate Trump and his supporters, like the basket of deplorables. And what did she say? A basket of deplorable people, blah, 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 and the other half are naive, or something like that. So basically insulted every Trump supporter, which is not smart, but also gives you a window into her mindset that we really are deplorable. So I don't think she knows what the alt-right is, and that's just a term of art for the day. Who knows how long the term of art will stick around? And
a lot of people say, at least Mitt Romney, when he talked about the 43%, he was trying to be nice about it.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. I think I don't know if there's ever a single game changer. I don't know if we have poll data to indicate that comment that Mitt Romney made was a game changer, but it certainly wasn't helpful. And I don't think any of her supporters would argue that it was helpful. Although I've read a couple things where they try to yes, she was right, that there really are all these bad things that she described them, and I think that's trying to cover things up.
Now, the poll numbers, we see some real variations here. You mentioned polls. Sometimes Trump is ahead, sometimes it's tied. What do you think the pulse really is of the nation?
I think it's essentially tied nationwide. Now, it's a state-by-state electoral college battle, but the nationwide poll numbers do give you a flavor of what's going on. And I think that if the election were held today, it's a toss-up. Could be a tie, 269 to 269. There are multiple scenarios to get to 269 electoral votes, 269. So the latest polls have us consistently ahead in Nevada, Iowa, Ohio, and Florida. Consistently ahead or tied, but not behind. And there's some other polls that have her consistently ahead in Pennsylvania. But we're closing the gap. We're down 6 in Illinois. We're down 3 to 4 in Wisconsin. Republicans haven't won Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Wisconsin, I don't believe, since 1988 with President Bush. So there's a lot of electoral college map changing and shifting, and I think it's almost all to our benefit. I don't know any. Arizona and Georgia, traditional red states, although they've been shifting a little bit, they're close, but we're not losing Arizona and Georgia.
And that's something people have talked about as well. Trump talked about it himself, saying he would turn states red that Republicans haven't even thought about campaigning in.
And he was laughed.
That's
left
right.
at. And now we're down 6 in Illinois, down 3 in Wisconsin.
And
so
I think
who's laughing now?
And I think even Colorado came up as a state that Trump could win. And
Yeah, well, there's
Colorado
polls, recent polls. Some have Clinton up, but there's several that have Trump up 5, Trump tied, Trump up 2. So we're doing well in Colorado, and we're investing a lot in Colorado in human resources and in campaign activity.
So where can we expect to see Trump campaigning heaviest? I'm thinking the rallies where he gets tens of thousands of people showing up.
It's the states where we're close or want to boost up our lead. So I think the data is going to dictate the travel schedule almost entirely. I mean, obviously there's certain things we have to get on the books and we can't change. Let's say we have a rally set in Columbus, Ohio next week, and then a poll comes out, has us up 12. We'll probably still do the rally, but you're going to, wherever he goes, that you can tell that's where we think we need to be.
Okay, thank you. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to The Honest Media. Again, I'm here with Alan Cobb, and he's the National Director of Coalitions for the Trump campaign. And we were talking about your background in the break, and something that came up was the many years you worked for the Koch network. I'm wondering, do you expect the Kochs to give their support to Trump as the campaign goes on?
Well, they said they haven't. I mean, I spent a lot of time and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears with the Koch network, and it's a fascinating and also very important part of the American political fabric, and they do such a great job fighting for limited government and free markets, and it was an honor to work with them and for them for a number of years. They've said they're focusing on the House and Senate, and I think that's fine. That's their prerogative. I think that as they focus, there was an article the other day, they're going to focus on get out the vote in some of the key battleground states where they have competitive Senate races, and a lot of those states are important to us, so it certainly will end up helping us. But any network, you have to pick and choose what you can do, and one of the many things I learned, valuable lessons I learned from the Koch network, is where can you be a difference maker? And that's ideally where you put your time and effort in, and they feel like they could be a difference maker in other areas. Would we take their help and support? Absolutely, but they've clearly made a different decision, and we're moving on.
And so in your political career, you've gone from local all the way up to now a national presidential campaign, and it's really an interesting national presidential campaign. What do you think is the most unique part about the Trump campaign?
Gosh, there's so many. Probably we've got so many good assets. Maybe it could be Donald Trump's children that are on the campaign trail who are huge assets, which I know Mitt Romney had some fine children. Maybe not as many on the campaign trail. That's an enormous asset. And I think the other interesting thing is the enthusiasm and the loyalty from the grassroots that certainly seems to me is at a higher level than any of the most recent nominees, including President Bush. I think that's why you see, I think the very first big rally was last summer in Mobile, Alabama, and it was a 40,000 seat football stadium, and he got 30,000 people in there, and it was unprecedented. And that's when I think that started turning some people's heads. So I think that's probably the most unique, just the absolute love and support and energy from the grassroots. That's different than many candidates. And I think that's one of the many things that the traditional political establishment, media and otherwise, have had a hard time understanding and explaining.
And those rallies, they are just massive, massive, massive rallies. We talked about the media bias earlier, but there will be, 10 protesters at a rally with 50,000 people. Why do you think this happens, and why do you think the media hones in on the protesters instead of Trump?
I think they like stories of conflict, and I think I kind of understand that. I do think, speaking of protesters, if you recall that during the primary cycle there were lots of protests and people that would infiltrate the events. Not happening so much now. Just tells you those protests were not organic. I think they were organized and funded. And I think the effort was trying to take out Trump as a serious candidate before he even got the nomination, and it clearly didn't work, or we wouldn't be where we are now with essentially a toss-up race.
That's a good point, and I do notice Trump likes to say whenever one actually does interrupt, which you're right, it's rare nowadays. The Bernie people were definitely more passionate than the Hillary people.
That's right.
So how do you see the Republican Party changing and growing in the next 4 to 8 years under a President Trump?
I think there's a greater appeal to more of the working class, and I think it should cause many Republicans to reflect on some of the issues, and maybe it's some subtle differences, but like on trade, let's make sure it really is free trade and fair, not just free trade in name only, and Let's make sure we're looking at those trade documents, whether it's TPP or NAFTA. And I also I think it'll be refreshing under a Trump administration, as I mentioned, kind of breaking through the conventional wisdom of this is how we always do it. He's going to be much more willing just to break things up and just do things differently because it doesn't make sense. And I think there's lots of ways to help and improve Washington that are not necessarily ideological. It's how do you get things done? How do we make sure that federal contractors can get their work done? The federal government can hire people without having to go through 18 steps or fire people without 22 steps. So I think a lot of that is going to be helpful for someone that's outside of the system. Certain things that just don't make sense, let's do away with them.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, everybody watching this knows how important it is to defeat Hillary Clinton on November 8th. But I wonder, what in your view or in the campaign's view is the most important reason why Hillary Clinton has to be kept from the White House?
Oh, it's got to be the Supreme Court. And in some ways, it's unfortunate that our Supreme Court should simply enforce laws or interpret, but we have got it legislated for the bench. I know that's a cliche. I wish I could come up with something better. So it's too bad the Supreme Court is that important, but that's where we are in our system of jurisprudence. I think the second thing is the national economy. We've had stagnant wages under both Republicans and Democrats. We've had fairly anemic economic growth and job growth. I think you're going to see that would be another reason to vote for Donald Trump. A growing economy solves an awful lot of problems of poverty, awful lot of problems of wealth disparity, and a rising tide does lift all boats, and that just it does so much good for so many people if you simply have a much more robust economy, say it growing 3 to 4% instead of 1 or 1.5% as we've had under President Obama.
And over the next 30, 40 days before the election, what can we expect to see out of Trump?
I think you're going to see more policy proposals. You're going to see more displays of support from various different voter groups that people are going to be surprised that Donald Trump is receiving this. And I think you're going to continue to see a very robust, energetic campaign. And I also should mention Governor Mike Pence and what a superior candidate he is over Tim Kaine. He's out on the trail a ton. They're both workaholics. That's kind of humbling for a paid staff, but it's also inspiring. If they're going to work this hard, then I sure better be working hard. They're on the trail constantly, and also doing the other things you need to do, which doing conference calls and teletown halls with leaders, issue leaders, issue leaders with Republican leaders and voters, Democratic voters, union voters, and so they really are working their tails off.
I wonder if you can give us just a minute of how Pence was selected, because a lot of people came out of left field, and since then everybody loves Pence. But how did Pence get selected?
In some ways, it's kind of obvious. It's like you need someone that helps to provide something that the top of the candidate didn't necessarily provide, having in-depth Washington experience, but yet Mike Pence is hardly beholden to it. Having executive experience as a governor is helpful. And then certainly he's well respected by lots of parts of the Republican coalition, whether it's the business free market side or the social conservatives, the evangelicals, and pro-life supporters and voters. So in some ways it was a no-brainer. I thought it was a great choice. And I think we're lucky to have him on the ticket.
And my final question on the topic of the broader Republican coalition, what is your message and the campaign's message to some of the biggest names in Republican politics who are still just slightly reluctant to put their full weight behind Trump?
It's such an easy choice. It's so clear. Donald Trump said, is he some kind of free market movement conservative? No, but he sure has gotten to almost all of those areas in an honest and a thoughtful way. I hate to use this cliche, no-brainer, but I think it's more about those people who refuse to support Donald Trump than Donald Trump. I think that they're going to have to really come to grips and peace with themselves if they don't support Donald Trump. I mean, I get that's kind of their problem, not ours. We'd love to have them, but I mean, my goodness, we're doing all the things a good candidate and a good Republican candidate should do.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
It's great to have you on.
Great to be here.
We've been The Honest Media. Thank you for watching.